Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you a loyal son of DePauw, John McWethy.
It's, of course, a risk to bring graduates back because we do know a lot about this university. From the perspective of a parent looking out at you, you are 500 miracles, truly. God danced the day you were born, and now 21 or 22 years later, I am sure he is dancing again. You may not remember the specifics of this day, but you are being transformed as you sit here. Yesterday you were a student. Today, by the time you leave, you will be a graduate. Really nice. How many of you remember your first day here at DePauw? Oh yeah. It was another of those transforming days. I certainly remember mine. It was scorching hot, and my parents brought me here to a convocation right on this lawn. I remember it vividly. I was nervous, and my father insisted that we had to come up and meet the college president personally. It was mortifying. I was appalled. Then he insisted that we had to go look up my new advisor, faculty advisor, and meet that person. I was further appalled and wanted to dig a hole. I was so nervous and upset as we continued this procession of having to meet all the faculty that finally my mother, God bless mothers who intervene in these situations, said, let's go back to the motel. Maybe you can take a shower and calm down a little bit, cool off, because it was so hot. And I jumped in the shower, and I slipped and fell and grabbed the shower curtain, tore the bar off the wall. All the plaster came tumbling down on top of me. I banged my head, cut my knee, and I finally said to my parents, please leave. And I was launched. I was a college freshman, totally lost. Now, my memory of graduation 4 years later is a little less clear. I do remember again that it was hot, something that sometimes happens here in central Indiana. And all I wanted to do, I remember, was get out of here just as fast as I could. But first, I had to listen to some gray-haired white guy talk about how lucky I was and all of the great things that lay ahead of me. Well, I was lucky, of course, and I knew it. And the truth is, probably the best days of my life were ahead of me. Given my academic record, that was not too hard to achieve. And as President Bottoms has already said, perhaps the only person happier to see me leave here than my own parents may have been the university president at that time, because of the editorials I wrote in the college newspaper. What I needed from a graduation speaker was something a little different, maybe a little lighter. That helped to shape my thinking about what I was going to say to you today. If I offered you a whole lot of profound thoughts, my thought was 30 minutes after leaving here, you probably would have forgotten it. But my hope is 20 years from now, when your children ask you, what was graduation like? You might be able to quickly remember, well, I laughed and I was happy. That'll be my goal. So in the spirit of this profoundly important day of passage, I offer you 9 important lessons that you can sink your teeth into. Number 1, never trust your dog to guard your lunch. These are important. Number 2, and here is one for those of you who are math challenged. You do not need to balance your checkbook, but you do occasionally need to check your balance. It will be very important. Number 3, and this is for those of you who take over-the-counter drugs. Never take a laxative and a sleeping pill at the same time. Number 4, Never confuse your career with your life. And it's just like a parent to slip in the real message in between all of the levity here. We'll come back to that. Never hold a cat and try to use a dustbuster at the same time. Floss your teeth. You may not care about your teeth now, but when they start to fall out, trust me, you will. Do not lick steak knives. Stretch every morning and meditate. Now, I never did this, but it sounds like such a good idea that I'm sure you'll be a better person if you do. And finally, and this is one for just the men in the audience, when a woman you love asks, "How does my hair look?" the answer must always be, "It looks terrific, and you better sound like you mean it." Now, this brings us to the subject of honesty. And those little things called white lies. Little white lies. Not that you have ever encountered any of them here at DePauw. You remember your course descriptions? You remember what they told you during rush? It's part of our culture. The best operational definition for little white lies that I ever heard of came from the mother of former President Jimmy Carter. This was a formidable woman named Miss Lillian, and by anyone's standards, she was a tough nut, and she was always defending her son. Now, a female reporter who had repeatedly asked to have an interview with Miss Lillian finally was granted that interview and was asking her questions. Well, did the president, when he was a young man, ever lie? And Miss Lillian said, well, he may have said a few little white lies. And this reporter, sensing that she was onto something, a big scoop here, said, well, what do you mean by little white lies? And Miss Lillian held a very thin smile, and she looked at this female reporter, and she said, little white lies, dear? Well, you remember when you first came into the room and I told you how glad I was to see you? And how I told you how slim you looked? She was a woman who spoke her mind. That is what I hope all of you will do. Another formidable woman, Eleanor Roosevelt, bucked society in Washington. She was a bit too opinionated for the people in Washington, and she stood right up to those who criticized her. And at a White House function, she is quoted as saying, if you don't have something nice to say about people, come over here and sit next to me. So about this journey you're about to take, the journey called the rest of your life. Whatever you do, make a difference. You don't have to win a Nobel Peace Prize to have an impact. Try small acts of kindness, shovel a neighbor's walk without being asked, paint a room in your church, work an evening in a soup kitchen or a homeless shelter. Have something positive to say to someone around you, even though you may not be feeling very positive. If you help someone else, you will help yourself. It is so simple. It is not what you say, but what you do that makes a difference in your relationships, in your job, and in your life. And about your job, it's all right to have a passion for your work. In fact, it's wonderful. But separate your job from your life, because many of our jobs are very, very consuming. Learn to tell the difference. Ask yourself the question, if I am sick or if I die, is my boss going to care, or are the people who love me going to care? That's how the dividing line is, in case, of course, your boss and the person that loves you is the same person.